Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Beal. I'm the Commissioner of the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, and I've been co-chairing the Natural and Working Lands Group for 5.5 years now, or something like that. But I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and he's going to start with the first few slides.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Abello, and I'm the co-chair with Commissioner Beal. I've been the co-chair with her since the beginning, about 5+ years, and it's been a really great experience, and really appreciate Hannah with the nomination of the both of us to this work group. It's been a really challenging and fun experience. Here's the list of our members, and so it's a big group, a lot of experts in their fields, a really cohesive group. We've worked together a lot, and it's gone, I think, really, really well. In order to take a deeper dive into our recommendations, what we decided to do was to split our group up into 3 subgroups that would tackle each one of the recommendations and then report back to our larger group periodically over the course of many months of work. And so I want to thank everyone for their time and their efforts. I also want to thank Jody Sapphire, who was our facilitator, and there is no way that we could be where we are today without her. She kept the trains running on time. She kept Amanda and I focused on moving the ball forward, and so really appreciate all of her efforts, and also Tom Gordon from DACF staff, who was kind of our nut and bolt IT guy. So as I mentioned, so we focused on 3 elements of our original recommendations. We wanted to take deeper dives into those, and so Amanda and I are going to walk through these in more detail. But number 1 is to increase by 2030 the total acreage of conserved natural working lands to 30%. Number 2, increase the amount of food consumed in Maine to 30%. And then finally, our 3rd recommendation is to build the amount of forest carbon on private and public lands.
Yeah, so as you can see, we really came at this work thinking about how our natural resource base is just such an incredible asset for us in our state, both for mitigation and adaptation. And these were 3 goals that, as Tom said, we pulled these from. These were our goals that were embedded in the original climate action plan, and we just really knew they needed more work, and we needed to do a deeper dive and get down into them. So that's what we did. And I also will just say that reflecting upon all of these big storms we had over the winter and spring, it was really impactful. As you can imagine, in our department, we have all the state parks and public lands, inland, coastal, of course, agriculture, forestry. There was a lot of damage that got done that will take years for us to recover from, and these associated industries as well have really sustained some challenges. So it's so important to us that we take these recommendations forth and with the weight of how important they are. So make sure I'm advancing my slides here. This first goal around increasing by 2030 the total acreage of conserved natural and working lands in the state to 30%. This is a really big goal. When we first set this the first time around, we didn't really have time to dig down into what would it take to get there, what would it take to do that. And so by conserved, we're talking about mostly voluntary purchases of land and working forest and farmland easements. Right now, as a state, we're at about 22%, just over 22% of our land is conserved. But we need to look under the hood because we're doing really a good job in certain types of conservation, but in others, such as farmland protection, we're sort of way behind. In fact, only about 3.5% of our agricultural soils, our best farms, are protected at this point in time. So we really need to pick up the pace. At our recent pace, we've been protecting around 50,000 acres annually. In order to reach this 30% number by 2030, we would have to increase that rate 5-fold. And so, as you can imagine, that requires capacity to do that. It requires money, resources, funding. And we have a specific goal to get at that low percentage of farmland that's protected to double farmland that is protected by 2030 as well, embedded in that 30% goal. So to do that, back of the envelope calculations, we were coming up with a number of around between, farmland and other types of conservation, around $70 million a year. That's a big number. It's not necessarily all going to need to come from the state. There are some good programs that we can tap into at the federal level and other types of funding where we can get matching funds for the work that we do. We already do quite a bit of that, and we just need to do more of it. So for the next slide, the next goal is to increase the amount of food consumed in Maine from state producers to 30% by 2030. And I should say, actually, I meant to mention when I was talking about the 30% lands goal, just a shout out to Andy Cutco from the Bureau of Parks and Lands in our department and Adam Bishop from Maine Farmland Trust for co-chairing that subcommittee. They did an excellent job. And for our 30% food subcommittee, Craig Lapine, who is our Bureau Director for the Bureau of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Resources in my department as well, and Brittany Peets, who also works with Craig. They did a great job tag teaming on that as facilitators as well. So when we talk about food and, how we grow our food, where it comes from, there are just a lot of different mitigation and adaptation elements we can really look at. And for example, just by supporting climate-smart agricultural practices and increasing the amount of food that we're consuming locally, so it's not coming from far, far away. It also gives us the opportunity to really have more control over our climate-related footprint that's associated with food production. So again, climate smart practices and doing other things like paying attention to food waste and all of those things are part of that picture. And we also can decrease our dependence on fragile global supply chains, which will remain vulnerable to climate-related shocks as we go forward. And we all experienced a little bit of that during COVID. There's also been that going on in the background with climate impacts as well. And if we're going to see more volatile patterns, then it's logical that we'll see more disruption there as well. And then one of the other things I'll call out is that we did talk about the importance of creating a Maine food plan. We are one of the, I think we might be the only New England state that doesn't have a food plan for our state. This is a good opportunity to put something together that we can measure and use to track our progress and really look at the food system as a whole system, and to be able to identify vulnerabilities and opportunities and really work toward a common outcome. There is an opportunity on the forefront for us to do this work. The state can be, involved in helping to really make this happen. The University of Maine is in a great position to help make this happen, and many, many other supporting entities. And it also provides an opportunity for us to just sync up with other recent state plans that have already been created to address hunger, promote seafood, and grow our economy. And just to call it out, I want to make sure people know we know that seafood is part of our food system and a really important part. And so that was at the heart of our conversations as well. I'll turn it back to Tom because he actually co-chaired the next working group, the subcommittee that he'll talk about the goal for.
Thank you. Number 3, develop new incentives to increase carbon storage. I was the co-chair with Jody Sapphire. And so really what we did here, the overarching goal of this is to keep forests as forests. And as everyone knows in this room, Maine is the most forested state in the nation. We focused a lot and built off an earlier iteration of the Forest Carbon Task Force. We focused a lot on small to medium landowners. Those are, generally speaking, landowners who have between 10 and 10,000 acres. There's about 8,600 landowners in that cohort, 86,000 landowners in that cohort. And so it's a big focus area. We drilled down on a couple of different pieces. Number 1, incentives for landowners, loggers, and foresters, really to take action, to take additional steps with climate-friendly forest practices that they can make some money, generate some revenue, but at the same time build the carbon stocks on their property. Number 2 on this is around technical assistance and financial incentives and financial resources. There was some work at the legislature this past session around looking at one of the current use programs focused on open space, and an effort there to try and get that modernized so that it would better address landowners who are interested in increasing carbon rather than keeping their land open. It's similar but a little bit different. And so we want to build off that too. And then another important piece here is developing markets for low-grade wood, because that's really a key piece in order to store carbon. Think of it as a garden where you're weeding the lettuce or weeding the carrots. You're sort of taking out some of the small ones so that more can grow bigger, and they'll be tastier and store more carbon down the road. So I think, too, another piece here that we talked about is building off of that small and medium landowner cohort into the large, more commercial landowners. We touched on that some. I think that's an area for development and discussion moving forward. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of programs for the large landowners. And so I think there's a role for the state in how we encourage and participate with the large landowners in storing carbon. I see that I'm out of time, so we'll stop there. But lastly, input from priority populations. We got a lot of good initial data from the Mitchell Center. There is a lot more left to be done, but the initial feedback that we heard based on their surveys and focus groups, number one, barriers to natural and working lands access. I think a key here is lack of information, the cost and transportation to those resources. So we want to drill down on that in the future. Barriers to natural resource industry careers. I think, we heard from the youth members that natural resources can feel isolated, and there's a lack of membership and guidance. And so I think that's going to be a challenge for us moving forward. How do we encourage more kids to get into these fields? And for new Mainers, language barriers, lack of transportation, and being unfamiliar with state resources. And then finally, challenges for accessing local food, hard to find culturally preferred food. And so that's an area for discussion and where we need to drill down with the Mitchell Center. Food deserts was also a theme. And then finally, for some, the price of local food. And I think that's an area where we need to get better about what that looks like. In certain areas, that may not be the case, but in other areas, that certainly is. And so that is where we are for now on that, but that is the end.
Thank you, guys.